Intimacy is more than a physical act. It is one of the most complex psychological encounters a man can experience. In that moment, the conscious self he presents to the world meets the vast, hidden territory of his unconscious mind. What he truly experiences is a cascade of deeply layered psychological processes, most of which he himself may not fully understand. The moment of entry is not a single feeling, but a collision of archetypes. The lover seeks union, the warrior seeks conquest, the child seeks safety, and the king seeks to bestow blessing. This is the precise psychological threshold where the story he tells himself about himself is either reinforced, challenged, or fundamentally rewritten. His entire psychological history, every success and failure and connection, is present in that threshold. This video breaks down the 5 core psychological layers at play, using Carl Jung's model of the psyche as our guide. We will systematically explore the interplay of the persona and the shadow, the profound need for validation, the awakening of the anima and the dissolution of boundaries, the internal battle between fear and love, and the crucial phase of integration that follows. This is not about speculation, but about mapping the documented structures of the psyche as they are activated during intimacy, moving beyond the surface to the soul-level experience. The first crack in the armor appears even before the physical act is fully realized. This is the layer of power and vulnerability, where strength meets fragility. A man enters this space carrying the weight of his persona, the mask of the strong, capable, and in-control individual that society expects him to be. This persona is a necessary adaptation, a psychic skin designed to navigate the social world, but during intimacy, its integrity is instantly tested. The very act of being so exposed, so physically and emotionally open, can cause this mask to slip. Beneath it lies the shadow, the repository of everything he has repressed, fears of inadequacy, of not being enough, of failing to satisfy. This is the inherent duality of the experience. He may feel a profound sense of his own power and capability, the realization of his physical presence, yet simultaneously, the risk of judgment can bring forth a deep-seated vulnerability. This vulnerability is not a sign of weakness, but a fundamental aspect of the human condition in the face of true connection. It is the hero confronting his own inner limitations. The moment the ego realizes it is not entirely in control. In this space, his stillness is not boredom. It is a form of psychic recalibration, as these two opposing forces, the performed strength and the hidden fear, momentarily coexist. The ego, the center of consciousness, temporarily loses some of its rigid control, allowing contents of the unconscious to surface. This temporary ego dissolution is a critical part of the process, necessary for true connection, yet terrifying for the part of the self dedicated to self-preservation. This psychological tension is the engine of the experience. The intensity of this duality is amplified by the cultural pressure placed on male performance. His worth, often unconsciously, feels tied to his capacity to elicit a specific response. If the man is highly identified with his persona, the vulnerability will feel like a threat to his very identity. Conversely, if he has begun the process of shadow integration, this vulnerability can feel like a welcome relief, a moment where he can finally put down the heavy shield of expectation. A partner can help ground this tension through simple, non-evaluative connection, like synchronizing breath or gentle shared silence, which can lower stress hormones and create a container of safety for this vulnerability to be held and accepted. This non-judgmental acceptance is the first step in moving the experience from performance to genuine relational depth. Once the body begins to feel safe and the immediate threat to the persona subsides, another psychological circuit activates with profound intensity. This is the validation feedback loop, a deep-seated, often unconscious need for affirmation from his partner. This goes far beyond the physical acknowledgement of pleasure. In the heightened state of intimacy, a man's perception becomes acutely attuned to his partner's reactions. He is, often without realizing it, scanning for micro-expressions, a fleeting look of pleasure, a subtle shift in responsiveness, a sound, or a touch. Your reaction in these moments is processed as critical data about his worth, his desirability, and his efficacy as a partner. In Jungian terms, this powerful need can be an unconscious projection of the anima, where the partner's face momentarily becomes the carrier of every feminine verdict he has ever sought or feared. It is a feedback loop that directly impacts his sense of self. If he perceives affirmation, his ego expands, and the experience is filed under success, reinforcing his confidence. If he perceives indifference or disappointment, the shadow contents, the feeling of inadequacy, rush in, leading to immediate withdrawal or defensive behavior. The key is to understand the difference between healthy affirmation and an unhealthy dependence on external validation. Healthy validation strengthens connection and reinforces positive behavior, confirming the shared reality of the moment. It is about acknowledging the authenticity of the experience. An example of this is using descriptive praise that focuses on the process and the shared experience, such as, "I love how connected I feel right now," rather than solely on outcome or appearance, such as, "You are the best." However, when a man's self-worth becomes overly reliant on this external feedback, it creates a fragile identity, perpetually dependent on the other for its stability. The payoff is learning to offer affirmation that satisfies without creating dependency, focusing on the quality of the connection itself. This shifts the focus from, "Am I good enough?" to, "We are connected." This shift helps him integrate the experience as a shared success, rather than a solo performance judged by an external authority. But what happens when mere praise is not enough, and the very boundaries between self and other begin to soften? This leads us to the third layer, dissolving walls and the role of the anima. This is where the psychological and biological processes of bonding converge to create a sense of profound, often overwhelming connection. Neurochemicals, particularly oxytocin, the so-called bonding hormone, flood the system, fostering attachment and reducing the perception of separateness. Psychologically, this corresponds to the awakening of the anima. The anima is not an external partner, but the inner feminine archetype within a man's psyche. It represents his capacity for relationship, for emotional depth, for intuition, and for receptivity. This is the Eros principle, the force of love, connection, and creativity, becoming dominant, temporarily overriding the logical, boundary-focused logos principle. It is a temporary shift from the analytical, intellectual mind to the symbolic, feeling-oriented mind. This dissolution can be both exhilarating and disorienting. It is a glimpse into the soul's desire for union, a momentary experience where two separate selves feel like one interconnected system. The rigid lines that define where he ends and his partner begins become permeable. This is not a loss of self, but an expansion of it, a brief period where the psyche experiments with a state of unity, a glimpse of the self with a capital S, which in Jungian terms is the archetype of wholeness. This is a healthy merge when both individuals can still maintain a core sense of self within the connection. A sign of this is the ability to remain present and verbally or non-verbally connected, even if only through touch or eye contact. A warning sign, however, is not this feeling of unity, but a subsequent dissociation, a feeling of being lost, of time unaccounted for, or a sudden, rigid emotional shutdown. True connection in this space allows for the walls to come down without the complete loss of self. The anima acts as a bridge to the unconscious, and through this bridge flows creativity, empathy, and a deeper connection to life itself, making the moment profoundly spiritual for the man, even if he cannot articulate it. On the flip side of this profound merging waits one of the oldest human terrors. Moving past the ecstasy of union, we arrive at layer 4, the internal conflict of fear versus love. Intimacy is a crucible where the primal drive for connection wrestles with the innate fear of exposure, rejection, and abandonment. The same neurochemical bath that bonds him to you can also trigger alarm bells rooted in past experiences. The shadow contains not just abstract fears, but the ghosts of prior rejections, past hurts, and childhood humiliations related to vulnerability. The deep opening required for layer 3 leaves the man psychically exposed. For a few critical moments, especially in the physiological aftermath, the brain's fear center, the amygdala, can become significantly more active. This is the psychological tug-of-war between the courage to be vulnerable and the instinct for self-preservation. The sudden quietness, emotional distance, or need to physically withdraw that can follow is often a physiological and psychological response to this spike in vulnerability. The fear of intimacy is often, at its core, a fear of the pain that intimacy can sometimes bring, the pain of loss, of being misunderstood, or of having one's vulnerability exploited. This is not a pathology, but a common human struggle amplified by the intensity of the experience. The courageous act is to choose love and connection, even in the face of this fear. This internal battle is a significant, often unseen dynamic that determines the long-term emotional success of the relationship. De-escalating this fear involves naming it, not pathologizing it, and creating a safe space for it to exist without judgment. Verbalizing this internal experience, even briefly, can significantly reduce the body's stress response and prevent a defensive withdrawal. It is about acknowledging the darkness within, the shadow's resistance, to more fully embrace the potential for love and connection. If the partner understands this withdrawal as a fear response rather than a personal rejection, they can respond with grounding presence, effectively neutralizing the shadow's power. The final layer begins once the physical intensity subsides and the breath begins to normalize. This is layer 5, identity integration, and the importance of aftercare. The The next 20 minutes are crucial. They decide whether the experience becomes a building block for the self or another brick in a defensive wall of emotional distance. This is the phase where the psyche processes the entire encounter and integrates it into the man's ongoing narrative of who he is. This is a critical step in what Jung called individuation, the lifelong process of integrating conscious and unconscious elements to become a more whole, integrated individual. The ego, which was momentarily decentralized during the peak of connection, now works to assimilate what happened. His thoughts might turn inward, contemplating questions of identity. Did I show up as the man I aspire to be? Was I truly seen? Did I compromise myself or find myself? This quiet period is not a rejection of the partner, but a necessary psychological and energetic process. It is where the various archetypes activated during the experience, the lover, the warrior, the child, the king, are reconciled and filed away. This is why this is not a time for demanding conversation or premature cognitive intrusion. Asking, "What are you thinking?" too soon can force the ego to fabricate a socially acceptable answer, thereby overriding the authentic, organic imprint of the experience and halting the necessary integration. Optimal aftercare facilitates this integration without interruption. A simple protocol can involve sensory grounding, like maintaining a gentle physical connection, or using open, non-demanding prompts that focus on the present moment, such as, "I loved being here with you." Research indicates that respecting this integrative space can dramatically increase relationship satisfaction and deepen the connection for the future. This natural withdrawal is part of the male cycle of intimacy, a time for the psyche to file the experience into the story of the self. There is no neutral in this phase. It actively shapes his soul's operating system, confirming either that vulnerability is safe or that it must be avoided. It is how he learns that vulnerability is not a weakness, but the gateway to authentic strength and connection. These 5 layers do not operate in isolation. They form an interconnected psychological loop that activates with every intimate encounter. Power meets vulnerability. Validation feeds identity. Walls dissolve. Fear duels love. And afterward, the conscious self works to understand what the unconscious has just experienced. Recognizing this pattern transforms intimacy from a mysterious event into a comprehensible psychological journey. It becomes a path to wholeness, a mirror reflecting our deepest selves, and a catalyst for the individuation process. By understanding the Jungian dynamics at play, we can replace misunderstanding with empathy. Intimacy is revealed as a profound dialogue between souls, a sacred space where we are challenged to confront our shadows, embrace our inner feminine or masculine, and move closer to our true, integrated selves. It is in this honest reflection that we find the potential for deeper truth, connection, and personal growth. The depth of the experience is often proportional to the willingness to navigate these layers consciously. When a man understands the internal tension between his persona and his shadow, he can choose to surrender the need for control and embrace the vulnerability. When a partner understands the silent plea for validation, they can offer genuine affirmation that builds self-worth rather than dependency. When both partners recognize the temporary dissolution of boundaries, they can lean into the shared experience of unity without fearing the loss of self. This framework provides a language for what is often wordless. It gives form to the formless emotions that swirl in the space between two people. By giving these feelings a name and a structure, we demystify them. We bring them into the light of consciousness where they can be understood and integrated. This is the ultimate value of applying Jungian psychology to everyday life. It offers a map for the interior world, a world that is often dark and uncharted. This map allows us to navigate the waters of intimacy with more confidence and less fear. It allows us to see the quiet moments, the shifts in energy, and the subtle expressions, not as random events, but as part of a coherent psychological process. This understanding fosters not only empathy for our partners, but also for ourselves. We begin to see our own reactions, our own fears, and our own needs for validation reflected in the process. The journey toward wholeness is a shared one, and understanding one side of the equation inevitably sheds light on the other. The psyche is a relational organ. It knows itself through its connections with others. Intimacy, therefore, becomes one of the most powerful catalysts for personal growth available to us, moving the experience from the realm of the purely personal into the realm of the archetypal, connecting the individual to universal patterns of human experience. Therefore, the next time you find yourself in an intimate moment, consider these layers. Consider the dance between power and vulnerability happening within your partner. Consider the deep, silent plea for validation that may be hidden beneath a calm exterior. Notice the moments when your own walls begin to dissolve and the feelings that arise in that space of connection. Observe the flicker of fear and the stronger pull of love. And afterward, honor the quiet space of integration, for it is in that space that the soul updates its understanding of what it means to love and be loved. This awareness transforms the most ordinary of human experiences into an extraordinary journey of self-discovery and shared connection. Until then, remember this: intimacy is not only about what two bodies share, it is about how two souls awaken each other to truth. It is the practice of courage.